All right, I'm live. Let me get live on Instagram. And then I got to post and let my peeps know that I'm live. And when I say my peeps, I mean the folks that follow me on social media. So let me get rid of that screen before the echo comes up. So again, I'm posting on Twitter. I'm live on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And have we got a doozy today? Have we got a doozy to talk about today? Okay. Because so much has happened in this week, and we definitely have to talk about it. Okay. All right, great. So we're going to jump on in because, as always, there's a lot to say and not necessarily a lot of time to say it in. Okay. So, my topic today is pulling it up on the screen for you. Comics and ideology, do they mix? Comics and ideology, do they mix? All right. Now, the biggest news this week was obviously the assassination of Charlie Kirk. God rest his soul and God give grace to his surviving family. I can't imagine what they're going through, nor would I want to. I was reading some Instagram posts by Bernice King, daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and she was talking about her resonance with what they must be feeling. And so I spent the last couple of days pretty much kind of speechless. The impact of this event was so great. Okay. But one of the quickest reactions to his death has been various people across social media, which include comic creators, actually rejoicing in him being killed. Okay. So we're going to deep dive into that today, and we're going to look at something in particular. But before I go further into that, before we take that deep dive, I have to establish this one thing. And it's going to be myth busting for some people for sure, but it must be established. And here it comes. Comic books have always been political. Lord have mercy. I'm going to say that one more time. Comic books have always been political. So it is disingenuous and factually incorrect for anybody to try to claim that the idea of comic books and superheroes having some type of reflection of the times they were in according to political ideologies at the time, trying to say that that didn't happen is untrue. It's factually, historically incorrect. One of the challenges of being from whatever generation you're from is understanding that many things have happened before you were born. And those things that happened before you were born actually shape the life you're living now. One of the reasons that I'm more sensitive to that is because my father taught me that. My father talked to me about what it was like for him growing up. And my father talked to me about what it's like being a Black man in the times that he grew up in. And my father made me listen to his music, which is why I have appreciation for more classic acts, because my father made me listen to his stuff. So I'm saying it is disingenuous and factually incorrect for people in today's environment to try to claim that comics being political or used for political ideologies, that somehow is new. No, it's not. And I'm going to show you right here. So we're going to start with this pic here. Let me pull it up on the screen. All right, there we go. So here we have a picture of Superman saying, "Let's all fight, buy war bonds," specifically referencing buying bonds for World War II. So you have Superman saying, "Let's all fight," breaking out of chains, saying, "Buy war bonds," supporting the United States position against the Axis powers. Okay, let's look at this. This one is going to be a firestorm. I'm going to show you World's Finest Comics number 8. Look at this right here. So you got Superman, Batman, and Robin selling bonds to kids with a sign that says, "Sink the Japanazis with bonds and stamps." You see that? It's right in front of me. DC Comics published World's Finest Comics issue number 8 in the winter of 1942-1943. Jack Burnley illustrated the cover that depicts Superman, Robin, and Batman in a booth under the sign, "Sink the Japanazis with bond stamps, selling bonds to children." World War II era comics frequently promoted supporting the war effort and contained stories of comic book heroes aiding American soldiers in defeating the Axis enemies. Okay, you see that? That would cause a firestorm if anything like that was released today, but here it is in World War II times, 1942, 1943. Once again, I'm trying to demonstrate and underscore my point that comic books and superheroes being used as a part of political and social political ideologies is not new. All right, let's go on to the next image. That one, look at that one. Knock out the Axis with bonds and stamps. I see you, Dave T. I see you. Thank you for your comments. Keep bringing the comments. I'm going to do like I always do and review comments at the end. But I do see them and I appreciate them. So we're going to bring them up. Just wanted to make that clear. So look at that. Knock out, let me move me out the way. Knock out the Axis with bonds and stamps. The larger picture is Robin is beneath Batman as well. So look at that. Look at that, the Axis powers, and look at the characterizations of the leaders, which would be nothing but a firestorm today. But I'm trying to show you how comics have been used in the past, that this is not a new phenomenon. Now we're going to go to the next one. Now, for those of you that don't know, Captain Marvel, Shazam, has a villain in his rogues gallery called Captain Nazi. Now, right here, this cover is actually Captain Marvel Jr. going against Captain Nazi. And what is he saying? He's saying, eat lightning, Razzi. Do your worst, Dovikoff. Okay, missed. Look at that. Plain as day. Okay, Junior, Captain Marvel Jr. versus Captain Nazi, round 2. Next up, probably the most famous Captain America cover of all is Cap punching Hitler. Okay? Now, the one where he's appearing in the Avengers for the first time, Avengers number 4, drawn by Jack Kirby, that's pretty famous too. But this is probably the most famous cover of Captain America. Okay? Smashing through Captain America came face to face with Hitler. Also, Captain America's young ally, Bucky. Okay? And you see the swastikas and you see the whole thing. Remember that Captain America was literally created to be a fictional embodiment of American ideals, and he's a soldier. Okay? He's a super soldier. He later on became what we call a superhero, but he was created to be a super soldier. Okay? The original idea, if the experiment worked on Steve Rogers, was to create an army of Captain Americas to help us against the fight against the Axis powers, but they killed Dr. Erskine before they could complete that project in terms of duplicating the success that they had with Steve Rogers. You understand? But once again, not new. Now I want to bring this one up. Okay, look at what Batman is saying here. Batman is saying, don't believe those crackpot lies about people who worship differently or whose skin is of a different color or whose parents come from another country. Remember our American heritage of freedom and equality. That's Batman putting it right out there in a comic. Do you see that? Do you see that? What's right in front of you? So my point in starting off with all of this is that it is disingenuous to say that comics and superheroes have never been used socially or politically or for ideologies. Not true. Okay, just not true. So you might say, given that we see Superman, Batman, and Robin being used to say things that would these days be inflammatory and start a social media fire, what's the difference between then and now? Okay, there are many, but the main one I want to focus on is that the country was more unified and in more agreement in the past in terms of all those images I just showed you. We can always debate the rightness or wrongness of our past war actions because there's always been different thoughts, different perspectives on war itself and our involvement in wars as America and Americans. So there's always going to be multiple angles on that, as there is with everything. Nevertheless, our participation in the wars, they happened. And superheroes were used to support our wartime positions, as well as, like I just showed you, Batman talking about reinforcing our American ideals of freedom and equality. Ideals of freedom and equality. And Batman was saying very clearly that even people with different backgrounds, don't let that throw you, because our American ideals are rooted in freedom and equality. So I will again pose the question, what's the difference about now? To do that, we're going to look at one of the more famous responses to Charlie Kirk's assassination on Wednesday. A lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, I mean, the story was everywhere. Of course it was. The story was everywhere. You couldn't get away with it. If you turn on the TV, if you're on any media at all, everybody was talking about Charlie Kirk. So, but there were some comic creators that commented on this. We're going to look at a few articles on some of the more high profile or some of the actual comments that got the most attention. Okay. So let me pull this up. This first one is from That Park Place. So shout out to WDW Pro. It should be on your screen now. Put me over here. Okay, well, maybe I'll do better over there. Okay. DC Comics writer Gretchen Felker Martin mocks Charlie Kirk shooting, claims police aren't people. The shocking news that conservative activist Charlie Kirk was shot at a Utah event has reverberated across the country. True. One of the more disturbing responses came from inside the entertainment industry. Gretchen Felker Martin, a biological male who identifies as female and is currently writing a Red Hood comic book for DC Comics. That's the image I have behind me, that Red Hood comic #1, openly mocked Kirk's death while also posting vile remarks about police officers, claiming that they're not people. The DC writer openly mocked Charlie Kirk mere hours after he was fatally shot, fueling serious questions about judgment inside DC, Warner Brothers, Discovery, and the broader culture surrounding its creative hires. So instead of offering sympathy or measured criticism or just saying nothing at all, Felker Martin responded to the news of Kirk's shooting with open ridicule. Now, this was, I believe, on Blue Sky. I don't think this was on Twitter. And so Gretchen says, thoughts and prayers, you Nazi B. Then they said, hope the bullet's okay after touching Charlie Kirk. Okay. These aren't critiques of Kirk's political positions. They were celebrations of an act of violence that left a man, a father of young children, dead. Which is true. These are not critiques. These are not offering counterpoints to what Charlie Kirk would say or stand for. This is reveling in his death. Okay. On the very same day, Felker Martin also turned to attacking law enforcement, referencing a sequence in the upcoming Red Hood comic. Kept seeing people tweeting Red Hood #1 for, I don't know, can I say suicide on YouTube? I think so. And for the life of me, I could not figure out why until I remembered it opens with a bunch of cops shooting themselves. I just don't really consider them people. Right there on Blue Sky. Do you see that? Okay. For a professional attached to one of the world's biggest comic publishers, this is extraordinary. Glorifying violence in fiction while also treating entire groups of real world people, civil service no less, as subhuman. If you don't know who Gretchen Felker Martin is, first gained notoriety as a horror novelist. A debut novel, Manhunt, in 2022, widely publicized, appeared on multiple Best of the Year lists. Follow-up, Cuckoo, 2024, which USA Today bestseller list. Felker Martin has built a reputation for extreme horror fiction filled with body horror and identity politics, cultivating a following in progressive literary circles. Okay. So announced in mid-2025, Felker Martin's Red Hood run is described as a gritty pulp noir tale. Jason Todd has left Gotham and Batman behind to take on a new city. New Angelique, consumed by corruption. The city's New Angelique. Felker Martin promised a story of sweat, blood, and powder burns, broken bones, and mind control, a city routed from the inside out. This project is being positioned as one of the centerpieces of DC's new adult line. Now, this is Gabe Hernandez posting his reaction. This is the writer of Red Hood #1 by DC Official. That's DC Comics Twitter, released today. It's long past time to flush the trash creators out of comics. Enough is enough. Okay. DC writer mocking the death of Charlie Kirk and dehumanizing police officers is not just about offensive tweets. It's about a professional entrusted with one of DC's flagship characters openly cheering the death of a political activist and dismissing law enforcement officers as subhuman. So for DC Comics, this is a test. Does the company stand by a writer who mocks the death of Charlie Kirk and suggests that police officers aren't people, or does it recognize the line that has been crossed? Okay? Because in the end, violence cannot be celebrated selectively. If it's wrong for one side, it's wrong for all. And if major publishers want credibility with audiences, they must apply that standard evenly. Now, first thing I want to do here is also talk about my position. Now, those of you that follow me, you should know my position because I'm always honest. I'm always talking about it. But my position is that I am a truthist. I'm not a political person. Life cannot be squeezed into political ideologies. So this whole left-wing, right-wing thing, what was life doing to exist before we came up with the idea of left-wing, right-wing, liberal, conservative, and whatever that means? So I don't believe in any of that. I'm not a political person. I'm a truthist. What's the truth? Okay? Because truth is the only thing that's going to stand. Truth is the only thing that's going to make free. Truth is the only thing that's going to open blinded eyes. So I'm just not into the political scene at all, even though I know comic books, which I love, have to do with it. That's what we're talking about today. I'm talking about me, David, personally. I'm a truthist. What's the truth? That's what I care about. That's what I see. Because life is bigger than any type of political ideology people can cook up. What was life doing to exist before there was in America? See, so that's my position, just so you know where I'm coming from. Now, if you follow me any length of time, you should know that because I'm always honest about that, but you should know. So that particular posting that we read of Gretchen got a lot of swift backlash on Twitter, and it got a lot of people demanding that DC Comics address those comments and this person. And so as it turns out, they did rather swiftly. So let's pull that up. Okay, you see that on your screen now. This is from Cosmic Book News. DC Comics cancels Gretchen Falker Martin's Red Hood after one issue following Charlie Kirk comments. So Red Hood #1 actually dropped the same day on Wednesday. It dropped the same day that Charlie Kirk was killed. So they let that one issue drop, but then they canceled the rest of the series. Following massive backlash, DC Comics has officially canceled trans writer Gretchen Felker Martin's Red Hood series after just one issue. The first issue was released on Wednesday, but DC has now pulled the plug on all future installments. In a notice sent to comic book retailers, DC said DC Comics cancels existing orders for Red Hood #2 and Red Hood #3, and any orders for future issues of the series. DC Comics will credit retailers for all invoiced copies of Red Hood #1, inclusive of copies that may have already been sold. Wow, that's quite a move and quite unusual. So why the series was canceled? When asked by Popverse about the reasons behind the cancellation, DC Comics issued a broader statement. At DC Comics, we place the highest value on our creators and community and affirm the right to peaceful individual expression of personal viewpoints. Post or public comments that can be viewed as promoting hostility or violence are inconsistent with DC's standards of conduct. So DC, after backlash, distanced themselves from Gretchen and their comments. And DC's putting out their position on it all. Okay, So here we have a tweet from Ethan Van Sciver. Now, you know, he's already a controversial figure as it is. So he said, meanwhile, over at DC Comics, their ghoulish leftist writers cackle and bathe in Charlie Kirk's blood. And so the rest of the article is stuff that you already know. Okay? So I'm going to repeat my question one more time. And those of you that are watching me live, leave me some comments. I'll put your comments on the screen. What's different between the stuff I showed you earlier? Batman, Superman, and Robin, Captain America, Captain Marvel Jr. What's different? There was a retcon where the Wonder Woman that fought in World War I was actually Hippolyta, her mother. And then World War II, they have Earth 2 Diana, and then our Diana, the one we know, on Earth 1. But she's still involved, and she wears a star-spangled uniform. She wears, a bustier with the eagle, the red and golden eagle, and then she has star-spangled underwear or not underwear, star-spangled bikini briefs, and then they switch that to the warrior skirt. But Wonder Woman's costume has always been patterned after the American flag. So even though she's a Greek mythologically based heroine, she's always been positioned as a part of Americana. So what's the difference between then and now? Here it is in a nutshell. The difference is now that we are more divided than ever. When you go back into the World War II days and you go back in that time, the country was much more unified on our position. Not that everybody agreed with going to war, because I told you there's always opposition to every war. But generally speaking, we were much more unified in our position on it. And superheroes were used to support that. We no longer have a unified national ideology. There is no more truth, justice in the American way. Do you remember when they got rid of that Superman slogan? Now, that slogan was only popularized on the George Reeves TV show, Fighting for Truth, Justice in the American Way. That's where that slogan became a part of Superman's mythology and one of his most popular catchphrases. The one that started out with, "Look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman." Fighting for true justice in the American way. Chris Reeves' Superman also says it in Superman the movie. When he was doing his interview with Lois, he said he was here to fight for truth, justice, in the American way. I would play those video clips, but I don't want to get copyright struck, so I'm just telling you what they said, okay? We don't have a unified national ideology, and there is no more truth, justice in the American way. Let me pull this back up and examine it in light of what I just said. So when Batman is talking about crackpot lies, you can't even say that now without it igniting another flame war, another social media storm, if you just use the phrase crackpot lies. If you just said that now on any post or any platform, and the more prominent, more famous that you are, the more people, the bigger your platform. If you said something like that, that in itself, the use of that language alone would become a thing. Just if you use the phrase crackpot lies, okay? About people who worship differently, that's talking about religious beliefs, because our American ideals have to be, the founding documents talk about freedom of religion and freedom of expression inside of your religion. Now, there's always this ongoing debate about what they meant by that and about what the national religion or religious beliefs are. Because when we pledge allegiance, we say that we are one nation, indivisible, under God, okay, with liberty and justice for all. So a lot of people have now interpreted differently what Batman will be talking about and what the pledge was talking about, or whose skin is of a different color. Uh, Skin is of a different color than what? Than who? So perhaps he meant non-Caucasians, okay, whose parents come from another country. That can be immigrants. That can be a whole bunch of different things. When people say ethnic, they mean a lot of different things by ethnic. Remember our American heritage of freedom and equality, meaning that when you come to this country, regardless of your country of origin, that you have the same freedoms that come along with being a citizen here, and that you have equal rights under the law. At least that's the ideal. In practice, it may not be the same, but that is the idea. Okay? But all of the things, if Batman were to say this now in a comic, or anybody were to say what I just read to you, all of a sudden it becomes divisive. All of a sudden it becomes an argument. All of a sudden it becomes this thing that drives people into a frenzy. And the reason for that is because we are more divided than ever. We are more divided than ever. Now, I know some are going to say, rightfully so, that life has never been equal or the same for all Americans. That is factually correct. I am part Native American or indigenous people, and on actually both sides of my family, my mother and my father's side. I'm also African American. And so it is historically inaccurate to state that life has always been the same for all Americans. Okay. Same is true for Japanese Americans with the internment camps. And I saw a panel one time with Asian American actors. It was Chloe Bennett and Daniel Day Kim and George Takei and a few more. And they were talking about their experiences in Hollywood and the kind of roles they had to play and the kind of prejudices that they faced because of their Asian heritage. So it's incorrect to say that all Americans have always been treated the same. That's not true. What is true is that it's the idea that we should have the same freedoms, the idea that we should have the same rights under the law. But in practice, it's not true. And you might still say that we're not there yet, depending on the situation. But the difference between the past and now, even though we weren't all unified and didn't all see things the same way, is that we were more unified in terms of what America stood for and what it should stand for. Now, I've gotten to this debate many times on Twitter about Superman and what he represents. And, he represents the best of us, represents what we could be and should be, what our country could be and should be. Same with Captain America. And it's been stated many times that Captain America and Superman, when they talk about the American way, they talk about the idea of what our country is supposed to be, not the government or not a particular administration or regime. So when Superman and Captain America recite what they believe, they're not talking about who's in office at the time. They're talking about the idea of freedom for all Americans, the idea of freedom of expression, and the idea is the highest evaluation, the highest achievement, the highest realization of those lofty ideas and ideals, some of which are contained in our founding documents and some which developed as the country grew. Because remember, America is not even 300 years old yet. So we haven't been around that long in comparison to other countries on the globe. But the difference is, again, now we're so divided. We have moved into tribalism and subgroups and subgenres and groups of groups and groupies and a whole bunch of things. And people created that phrase, marginalized groups. Marginalized groups meaning what? Because a portion of that means that we're whining because we're not the plastics. We didn't get to sit at the cool kids table. We didn't get the attention when we were in high school, so you have to pay us attention now. That's always what I hear when I hear that phrase, marginalized group. It means we didn't get what they got, so now you owe us that. And no, they don't. That's why you always hear me talk about The Breakfast Club in the 80s, because The Breakfast Club in particular, that movie, and the 80s in general, solidified all of these tropes in the American consciousness. A brain, a nerd, a jock, a princess, a criminal, the Black character, the Asian character. A lot of those tropes are heavily rooted in the 80s. And so I'm not saying that some marginalized groups might not have legitimate concerns, but I'm talking about when I hear that phrase, part of it is rooted in saying, we didn't get that, so now you owe us that because we didn't get that. And so round and round we go about that whole idea. And so I'm always trying to figure out, what is the standard? What is the unit of measurement? What are people talking about when they say that? Because one thing you can't do in life, if you're arguing for your slice of the pie, one thing you're not going to do is make more pie. So if the pie is only so big and you're saying that a certain group of people got 90% of the pie and everybody else only got 10% to divide among themselves, and then that qualifies you to be a marginalized group because you're among the 10%. Do you know what's not going to happen? What's not going to happen is that everybody is not going to get 90%. So many times when people use that phrase, they mean they want to replace whoever they think the main group is. They don't want equality, they want to replace them, because everybody can't get 90%. If you divided the pie up equally between all the groups, and there's so many different groups, that's also my question is, what if you're a part of multiple groups? How many slices of the pie do you get? If you divide up among gender, if you divide up among gender ideology, if you divide up among religious faith, if you divide up among political ideology, if you divide up among age or generation, who gets how much of the pie based on all them subdivisions? So if there's only so much pie, and you're saying that one group has had the lion's share of the pie, and that's not right, and all these other groups didn't get the lion's share of the pie, what's not going to happen is that each one of those other groups gets a lion's share, because that's mathematically impossible. That don't have nothing to do with how I feel. That don't have nothing to do with nothing except math. It's not possible. So many times, not all the time, many times when people are saying stuff like that, they just mean they want to replace whoever they think the main group is. Whatever main group you think had the 90 and you're part of the 10, you're not trying to be equal with them. You're trying to take over for them. You're trying to be them. You're trying to have what they have, which means you're not different or better than them. You're trying to do the same thing they're doing. So you demonize a group of people and talk about how wrong it is and how wrong they are and how stuff isn't fair and blah, 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 blah. And what you want to accomplish by doing that is taking over what they had. That means by definition, you are not better than them, because you're trying to do the same thing they did. So you can see how incendiary even my comments are. You can see how we can go round and round and round and round, and people do. But stating facts, if there's only so much pie, everybody's not going to get a lion's share. If you're talking about a certain group that you think had a lion's share and you want it, you're trying to replace them. You're not trying to be equal to them. And if you're trying to replace them, you are literally trying to do the same thing they did, which means you're not better than them. You're trying to do the same thing they did. See that? And so because we have moved into that type of thing, into that type of tribalism, into that type of subdivision, into that type of thinking, we are now more divided than ever. And that manifests in so many different ways. Okay? And so how can it be solved if there's a limited amount of pie? Because many, many times what people mean is, I want to be the main group. I want my group and my groups to have that. So these people had it, and that's not right, and that's not fair. So now we want it. Then you're not better than them. You're trying to do the same thing they did. You're trying to say it's wrong when they have it, it's wrong when they did it, and you demonize them, but you say it's right when we have it, and it's right when we do it. Then you're not different. How? How are you different? So just these comments that I'm making alone are probably going to set off a firestorm on Twitter, but oh well, what else is new? I'm used to that. So this is what I mean when I tell you, this is where we are now. It's the difference between back in World War II days and now. That's the difference. We were more unified, even though things weren't great for everybody. I'm not trying to minimize that. I am Native American, African American. I'm not crazy. I understand the history of this country. I am not trying to say things have always been great for all groups in America. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is back then, there was at least an agreement on what the idea and the ideal should be. That's what I mean. What we were supposed to strive for was much more commonly understood and accepted. That's what I mean. All of that is gone now. All of that is gone. And what you have now is a bunch of groups and subgroups and tribes, everybody fighting for their own piece of the pie, everybody fighting for their own ideology, everybody fighting and say, we're right, and everybody else that disagrees with us is wrong. Okay? Now I'm going to put up some of these comments. Okay? Dave says, no one who writes superhero comics should be the kind of person who celebrates political violence and death. And DC agreed with that very, very quickly. Several things are true. Most comics being neutral and tepid, good versus evil, or stopping bank robbers, etc. And comics often reflecting the current politics. That's correct. So if you have stories that are more to the polar extremes in terms of morality, good guys versus bad guys, that kind of thing, which is what Star Wars started out being, but Star Wars has political themes too, but more of a, good guys versus bad guys or that kind of thing, or bank robbers or things like that. If you've ever read any early Superman and Batman comics, they were way more brutal. They were way more brutal when they first came out. If you don't believe that, go back and read some of the earlier runs of Superman and Batman. They were way more brutal, and Superman would stop like wife beaters, and Batman shot people, and it's just different. Okay, but anyway, if comics are neutral and they're doing basic good versus evil stories, that's one thing. But comics also often reflect current politics, like that famous Green Lantern panel where they're talking about where the black man is asking Green Lantern, they fight for all these skins. How come you're not fighting for the black skins? That's controversial still to this day. Okay. I don't think anti-Nazi comics were particularly politically divisive as they are American comics. KKK comics would have been more political. So once again, that's because there was a unified type of position. So my topic today was comics and ideology, do they mix? Okay, they've always been intertwined, but should they be, and how far does that go? What does that look like in today's climate? When people complain about politics, they don't mean everything involving politics. They specifically mean divisive politics and heavy-handed propaganda. Okay? So should superheroes be used to push propaganda and agendas? Now, one thing that we can all agree upon is that since 2015, last 10 years, there's been a pushing of wokeness and the girl boss narrative. There's been a push to change white characters to black, change male characters to female, or replace the original male character with their female counterpart who's better than them in every way. Mary Sue girl bosses, where she's just automatically good at everything. There's no growth. She don't have to work or nothing. She's just better than everybody right off the bat. And DEI characters are basically getting rid of what has been traditionally Caucasian characters and replacing them with other ethnic groups. There is no way to argue that that hasn't happened for the last 10 years. Okay? That's been part of what has divided us, because that's a very different approach than the country uniting against an ideology espoused in other countries that we're fighting against. That's different. Okay? American way is short for liberty, individual rights, equality, rule of law, etc. People don't get that anymore. But if you're going to change it to liberty, not a better tomorrow. Because they changed Superman's catchphrase from truth, justice, and the American way to truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. Okay? Throwing out the American way entirely. Okay? There's a movement against all marginalization when it should be against unfair marginalization. If someone is antisocial, toxic, parasocial, people will naturally distance themselves from them. And that's a really good point. So if people are toxic or negative, or if people are hurtful to the people around them, then that is not unfair if people want to be able to exercise their rights and their freedoms in peace and safety, and other people are a threat to that. But we have a completely different debate going on nowadays. We have a debate that's now based on demographics. We have a debate that's now not based on the actions of the individuals taking them, but based on what group is doing them. What group or groups are you a part of? Are you male? Are you trans male? Are you female? Are you a trans female? Are you black? Are you an indigenous person? Are you multiple different kinds of Asian? Are you Caucasian or white? The conversation now, even when news gets reported now, seems that everything is slanted around demographic descriptions instead of behavioral descriptions. That's where we are now. See that? And so the question remains, the question I'm posing with this broadcast, and I know everybody's going to have wildly different opinions. I know that you are, because this is something that's all over the place. The question remains, does this mix in comic books? Does this mix with superheroes, and should it? Should it mix with comic books? Should it mix with superheroes? They've always been mixed, but should we be a part of that in comic book world? Okay? And I know this is not an easy topic. I know these are not easy conversations. I know that. I know these are controversial, divisive, whatever. They still need to be talked about. In the light of everything that's happened this week, we still need to talk about it, because I believe we as, geeks, nerds, whatever, sci-fi fantasy community, we do have a responsibility for what we put out. And I'm always conscious of that as a writer myself. What am I putting out into the world? And so I just wanted to come on today because I wanted to pose the question. So I talked about some of what I think, and I talked about some of my attitudes and opinions, but I know everybody doesn't agree. And I know everybody doesn't see it the same way. I know that. 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 Okay. But leave me some comments below. Tell me what you think about everything that's happened this week. Tell me what you think about DC's response in firing Gretchen. Tell me what you think about the roles of comic books and superheroes are in these conversations. And tell me what you think, because I really do want to hear from you. Okay? So leave me some comments below and we'll continue the conversation. We'll continue the debate. Okay? That's it for me today. Thanks to all of you that watched my live stream. I know some of y'all got mad at what I said and clicked off. I know, but what else is new? So leave me those comments. Thanks again. And I will talk to you next week, same time. DT2 Comics Chat, out.